everyone, I'm Rachel Poley with Ari Meghlen, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. We're on episode 72, and this week's question is, what types of characters should you include in your novels? But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss a show. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like. All right, so what types of characters should you include in your novels? We all know the generic protagonist or main character, antagonist, and the villain. We're not going to be talking about those three today because, you know, they're pretty much staples in every story, book, movie, whatever. So we're going to be talking about some other types of characters that you might not have heard of, but they're typically in books anyway. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the confidant character. And this is someone or something the main character confides in. Readers can learn a lot about the main character's personality and thoughts through this. The confidant can be another character, or it can be the inside pages of the main character's diary, or it can be, voicemail messages to someone that they haven't talked to or seen in a really long time. But you're basically getting the inside scoop of your main character through this other character. Oftentimes, depending on the point of view of the story, readers learn and know things that the main character does not. And the confidant character can be an interesting way to do that, to have the readers know something, but other certain characters don't know it. And it's kind of like a gateway to explain more of the plot and keep the readers more on the edge of their seat. But at the same time, they're still developing their own character and other characters.
I have to admit, I love confidant characters. It's usually like a best friend or a second in command in any of my books. It's always that kind of relationship. And I like that you can do it where the main character like confides in them and talks to them and like shares fears and secrets and everything. But you can also do it the reverse, where the best friend sort of states something because they know the character so well that they can literally point out, it's like, I know you're scared right now, or I know you fancy that person over there, you're not fooling me, kind of thing. And they can be the part that reveals the secrets, probably against the main character's wishes. And I really like that. I've always thought those are really good characters to have. It's like, if you don't have a solid confidant character in some way, I think it does lack in a story. It can, because it has such a nice level and such a nice flavor. And I do like the idea of the like the diary pages or anything like that. I've never thought of that. I always have it as an actual character, but that's actually quite a cool concept, using like diary pages.
Well, I actually never thought of it happening in reverse either. Like, that's a good point, of having the confident character actually do the speaking rather than the protagonist or other character like explaining something to them. But I think just in general, the confident character or object or whatever is a great way to add more to the plot and explain more to the readers without sounding like an info dump, or without having the narration or the main character just, turn to the camera and be like, and now I'm feeling sad, and, or just whatever.
Or too much internal monologue, because that sometimes get used in that way, to the point where it's like, okay, we're bored of being in this character's head now.
Yes, exactly.
With that, I am going to talk about dynamic characters or developing characters. And these are characters that will change throughout the story. And you're probably thinking, well, isn't that the main character? And yes, the main character usually is a character that changes, whether they're scared and nervous at the beginning and then overcome that and become stronger and brave, or vice versa. They start out courageous and then they have a massive fail and they sort of wimp out. Obviously, these are very, very basic. These are very basic examples, but it shouldn't just be your protagonist that has change happening in them. It's like, in the end, your book may have a protagonist that's important. They aren't the only character that you should focus on, and you should have characters that change, and that change can be good or bad, but it's about their motivations, desires, and even personality changes, because other characters are going through this story as well, whether it's side by side with the protagonist, whether they're at home worrying about the protagonist, or whether they have their own little side adventure. So they're going to go and hit conflict. They're going to go and hit reactions to situations, and they're going to have emotions. So it's going to cause changes. People are going to react differently. They're going to view the situation they're in differently, possibly differently from the protagonist. So they do need to have more of a fleshed out feel. So don't just look at your protagonist and go, oh, this character needs change. This character needs to grow and build and overcome. Look at some other characters. Find another strong character or even a weak character, someone, and make sure that they have a change. Now, this is usually a permanent change and shows how the character has learned and developed over the story. But again, it can be both good and bad. So don't just automatically jump to the, oh my God, they've got better or anything like that, because that's kind of, done a lot.
Well, that's just the thing, is that obviously when we're reading a book, we're seeing the story through the protagonist's eyes, whether it's in first person or, another point of view, but we're mostly focusing on the protagonist. But just because it's their story doesn't mean that the other characters aren't affected. Like, your choices can affect the lives of other people. And I'm sorry, if your book is about a zombie apocalypse, that's affecting the entire world. It's not affecting just your main character. It's affecting everybody. Whether you see it or not, it's affecting everybody. And everybody that your main character speaks to or engages with, their lives are being changed as well. If they're a very minor character, obviously you don't need to show their change. But if they're like a sidekick or just a side character that happens to be with your protagonist for a couple of chapters, they do need to be developed in some sort of way. And everybody has a story, and you gotta pinpoint it. And I think adding the stories of side characters and such, it adds way more to the story in general, because it's not just your protagonist's story, it's everybody, and it just adds depth. It makes it like a three-dimensional story, and it's not just the main character's world, it's everybody.
That is it, exactly. I was just about to say, it adds an extra dimension. It kind of increases the realism, and we're even talking about fantasy. Still increases the realism, because if something happens to you as a person, something big or traumatic or wonderful, it will have a knock-on effect to people in your life, family, friends, work colleagues. So it will have that. And if we're taking examples, you could think about like Lord of the Rings. You've got like Frodo, main character, obviously a main character, Aragorn, main characters. But if you look at like Merry and Pippin, they change too. They, from how they were at the beginning to how they are at the end, they both have a change that's very distinct. Now, if they were just kind of like blah, 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 all the way along and hadn't been given any extra depth and development, I think it would have been a different story. I don't think it would have had the same impact. So all these extra little characters that were secondary and tertiary characters in around the back, around the side of the main characters, you don't have to think massive, but definitely put some dynamics in there.
Yeah, we'll even think of Sam, for example. I mean, and I'm going to use the movie Sam rather than the book Sam, because I only read the book once, and I remember I know the movies better than I know the book. But in the first movie, Sam leaves. I mean, he's a little bit of a coward. That might be a strong word, but he's a little bit of a coward, and he's sheltered. He just stays in his hobbit hole his entire life, and that's it. And when they leave, he stops and he tells Frodo, if I take one more step, this is the farthest I'm ever going to be away from home. And then you go to the third movie, and he literally picks up Frodo over his shoulders and carries him up the mountain. I mean, it's like,
there's a lot of change.
I'm sorry, Frodo would have been dead. The entire world would have been dead. The ending, the reason why it's a good ending is because Sam existed. And, he really came out of his shell and did everything. And I could go on and on about this, but I won't.
Should we have said spoilers at the beginning of this?
If you haven't watched Lord of the Rings yet, I mean, that's your own fault. I'm sorry.
Been out for years.
So I'm actually gonna turn everything on its head and talk next about the flat or the static character, which is pretty much the total opposite of the dynamic character. A flat character doesn't change much at all throughout the story. Their personality and or background isn't revealed well, and we only know a handful of traits about them. So think about a flat character as a minor character. Not necessarily a sidekick or a side character, just a minor character. They serve a purpose, and even if that purpose is small, they do impact the main character in some way, but we don't necessarily need to know any details about that character in order to move the plot forward. But they can still have an impact on the main character, like something that they say or something that they do. It can actually help develop the main character or another character in some way. So they do serve a purpose, but we don't need to know anything about them. They're important, but they're not that important. Which sounds really mean.
No, but I think that's right, because there can be situations where you can end up over explaining and over describing characters that don't need it. And because obviously we get told all this advice, make sure your characters are believable and realistic and developed, and they all need to have like massive amounts of backstory, and I need to know right back to who their grandparents were and everything. And sometimes it can make you feel that, oh my gosh, every character needs that. The woman who runs the shop on the corner, who your main character literally says hi to while they pick up a newspaper, we need to know everything about her. And it can become this thing where you end up creating profiles for people who are literally in for like 2 minutes. So yeah, it is important that not every character needs massively filling out. That's not their role in the story. They are almost like a signpost. They maybe add a little flavor, point the way, but they don't need massive amounts of detail. So yeah, I think we're kind of scared off static or flat characters, because it's like, oh my gosh, you have a character that's not like fully formed, and it's like, well, no, we don't need it. I mean, it reminds me, I had a character in one of my fantasy stories, and what it was there were people coming up through the beach at night, through the port. So they come onto the beach where all the ships were supposed to come, and they were coming out, and it was something that would normally you'd have to go and let the town watch know. And literally you have a flash of this character who runs the port, and he's in his little hut, and he's counting all the money that everyone who comes with a boat pays to dock. And he sees these characters, and he knows he should go and inform the town watch. But if they come, then they might start nosing around, and you kind of see that he's been like, skimming off the top, and that's why he doesn't raise the alarm. So that kind of explains how these characters manage to move through the town without getting, nabbed. It gives you a little bit about this guy, about the fact that this money that he's stealing is much more important than what these people could be doing to this town. But I don't give him a name. I barely touch on his description. It's literally a little flash to help the story move and explain how, because I've mentioned the town watch and everything, but why they're not there, why nobody flags it, and that's it. I didn't need to go into the detail of this guy, or who his wife is, or where he gets his coffee, or anything. It wasn't necessary. But just give a little bit enough, and that's it. Flat character. It's nothing detailed. Perfect.
Yeah, it's like a passerby. I think flat characters are actually one of the harder characters to add into your story, because you know how you get all this writing advice about, you got to show and not tell and things like that, and you have to decide how much is description is too much description before you start info dumping. And I think flat characters are difficult because we're told that everybody needs a purpose. Everybody needs to move the plot forward and do something. And in a way, a passerby can move the plot forward. It's like in real life. If you're waiting across the street and all these cars are passing you by, and then that one person stops to let you cross the street, well, now I'm moving on with my life because I'm not standing on the side of the road any longer. But I don't know anything about that person. They just happen to be nice for some reason. And because I remember for my writers group, I wrote a short story and I submitted it, and somebody in my group made a couple of comments saying that they would have liked to see more description in a certain scene. It was with a character that didn't really have much of a purpose, but they had like a small conversation with the main character that kind of helped the main character move on to the next scene. And I rewrote it and I added more description, and then I resubmitted it, and their comments back to me was, why do we need to see all this? And I was like, well, man, you told me to write more description, so I wrote more description. But looking deeper onto it, I gave them more description that wasn't needed. There was still something missing from that scene that the readers wouldn't necessarily get anything out of it. So when he told me to write more description, I wrote the wrong kind of description. I wrote description for him, thinking, oh, well, we must need to see what he looks like. We must need to, know his name and all things like that. And that wasn't the case at all. I needed to write more description about the main character and what she was thinking and where she was going next and where she currently was and so on and so forth. So I think it's hard to add flat characters because, I mean, in some ways it's easy to just write a character and then just leave them and just, go about the rest of the chapter. But sometimes it's hard to decide what exactly do we need to know about this character. Are they just a minor character or are they going to turn into a side character? And sometimes they do, because characters do whatever they want.
I agree. I also find sometimes you'll write like a flat character or a side character, like a minor character, I should say, who's like barely going to be in it. And then you'll find people going, oh my God, this sounded great. And then they become a major character because people got hooked on them. It's like, that was not your destiny. And now you're 3 books in. You were supposed to be off in 1 chapter, in and out. That's it. And now you've become one of the main cast. So
that actually happened in my mystery novel. I introduced a new character and she was in it for like 1 chapter, maybe 2. And my writers group absolutely they all latched onto her and they adored her. And like, she was easily everybody's favorite character. And spoiler alert, she's the one that gets murdered. So when they read that chapter, they were not happy with me. But it made for a good death because they were so attached to her. So I was like, okay, I guess I did my job.
That's what happens when you get attached. So bad.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, I'm so glad you like her. She's dead.
Yeah, which I didn't think people would attach to her. Like, yeah. She was always supposed to die.
Yeah.
It's not like I was like, haha, this is the favorite character, I'm gonna kill her.
Yeah, no, that was her destiny. And it's like, but how cool is that it's like it proper had much more of an impact than you were expecting.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it has an impact on others when I actually publish it.
Rachel ripping people's hearts out. Oh,
I know. Oh well, too bad. So sad.
Okay, I will touch on the last one. Obviously, there's probably a lot more than this, but these are the ones we're talking about. And that is a foil character. And that is someone who is opposite another character. You're talking mostly like traits. So obviously, if you've got a character who is ambitious and outgoing and confident, you'll probably do better if you also have like a reverse of that. So you've got a character who is shy and withdrawn and lacks confidence, sort of thing. And these can be really good because they can help build conflict. So imagine if you've got a quest or something and you've got the person at the front going, this is the way, everything's great, we can do this. Having that kind of foil character dragging themselves at the back, complaining all the time, bringing everyone down, saying, oh, this is the wrong way, this isn't going to work, we shouldn't be doing this, because it allows you to bounce characters off of each other. So say your main character is the one leading the charge, pushing on with this quest, and then you have another character who is, as I said, dragging at the back, complaining about everything. That can mean that your main character can react the same way, like, look, no, we're fine, I believe this, and just, constantly pushing. Or that conflict character's attitude can affect them. Maybe it starts to get in their head to the point where they start, maybe the conflict character can get in their head where they start to doubt themselves, and then maybe they start making mistakes because instead of moving with confidence and yes, I know this is the right way, I was told, I have a map, suddenly it's like, oh, maybe it's not, and then they go the wrong way. So foil characters are really good for that. You can kind of bounce with other characters, and it can create it's internal conflict, not internal conflict. What is it? It's not internal conflict. It's not external conflict. It's like a personal. Oh, there's a term, I can't think what it is.
Friction.
Yeah, maybe it's something like that. It can cause like a friction within a group, and I think that works really well in certain stories where, it's like you're not worrying about this big thing on the outside, and you're not worrying about the internal fears the actual character has in their head. You've got this like group dynamic that becomes a little bit crunchy, for want of a better word. And I think that can work really well. So yeah, a foil character is definitely something to think about, to have this kind of throw in some opposite traits from another character. And it doesn't have to be your protagonist that has certain traits that your foil character reflects the opposite traits. It can be, a secondary character or something, just something that can create a little bit of conflict within a group setting, I think works really well.
And you know what I just thought of, like just right now? So take this as you will. You could have the foil character be the protagonist. So for example, your character can be super confident on the outside, and then on the inside they might be totally anxious, and they could be like the total opposite of what they show to other people. Is that making sense?
Yeah. Especially because it depends on, that could also come in the sense of with one group of people, like say they were, the leader of a rebellion. So with the people who follow them, they could be all like, we can do this. And then in private with the personal advisor, it could be like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm really, everything's awful kind of thing. So that's
Which I guess you could also say that that's just internal conflict, but I guess you can probably work it both ways in some sense.
Yeah, no, I get that.
I think having a second character act as the foil character for the protagonist would probably be better, so that you can like actually see the stark difference between the two. So yeah, you know what? I guess a foil character, it creates external conflict and internal conflict, depending on how you use it.
Yeah, and how everyone reacts to it. So
yeah.
See, even we're learning stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Your characters don't need to be a specific type. Like, you don't have to have a foil character and a flat character. You can have a character that's a foil character and a confidant character. Like the whole enemies to lovers thing. You can have someone, be total opposites of each other, and they argue and, just hate the crap out of each other. But then they also confide in each other, and they swap secrets, and they, even though they hate each other, they know more about each other than anyone else.
So that's a good point.
Make like whole tons of different characters, because you know what? Everybody is unique, and we're all special, and we're all different, and that's just humans or zombie unicorns if you write fantasy. Whatever.
And if you don't get that reference, go back and listen to episode 70.
Yes. Alrighty, so with that said, there are more other types of characters than just the 4 that we talked about, but just for the sake of keeping this episode short and sweet, you can have the confidant character, where the readers learn more about the protagonist through another character. Make sure your side characters are also developing characters. You can have a flat or static character, which is the total opposite of the dynamic character, or you can have a foil character, which is the opposite of any other character. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Do let us know what types of characters you have in your novels, or if you think we missed any, let us know in the comments or on Twitter using the hashtag The Merry Writer Podcast. And if you want to get some extra content, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Merry Writer Podcast. You can support our show for as little as $1 a month and get extra bonus content, including mini episodes. And tune in next week for another episode of the Merry Writer Podcast, where we ask all the right questions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Sticky Notes. Our walls are covered. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.